Good evening and welcome to another edition of the Meet a Professional series. My name is Matthew Garcia. I'm with the YU Career Center and Associate Director of Employer Relations and Alumni Programs. I'm here joined by Ariella Cohen, who has been so gracious to make some time to speak with us today about her field, her work, and what you're here to learn a little bit more about. So without further ado, we're going to get into some questions, followed by that facilitated Q&A with those in the audience, whoever would like to ask questions and then wrap with some closing remarks. So, Ariel, again, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Happy to be here.
Awesome, awesome. So, why don't you do us a favor and tell us a little bit about yourself and what influenced you to do the work that you do today in your field?
Sure. Yeah. So I went to Stern, graduated in 2016, where I majored in physical sciences and music. The music was kind of just a fun little add-on. And I then went on to University of Pennsylvania for a master's degree in bioengineering, which turned into also mechanical engineering. And I kind of did that because I was interested. I've always been interested in the medical field, but I also wanted something a little more mathy. So I ended up doing bio and mechanical engineering in hopes to kind of get into the medical devices, medical robotics industry. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm working as an electromechanical engineer for a medical devices company, kind of a late stage startup, I guess you can call it, in the Philly area. And yeah, that's kind of where I'm at and my academic journey, I guess you can call it, into an academic leading into professional journey.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing and getting us started. So, talking about goals here. So, during and shortly after college, what influenced your short-term goals and long-term goals? And specifically, how did your undergraduate degree play a role in how you factored those goals?
Sure. Yeah. So I guess I'll start with the long-term goals. For me, a lot of it was about kind of talking to people. And once I decided that that's kind of what I'm interested in, I wanted something in this medical device kind of arena. I tried to just kind of reach out to people, friends or friends' parents or my parents' friends or relatives, just to kind of talk to people who were in sort of related fields. And I would say what influenced my long-term goals in terms of like what I ultimately decided to go for, even though, I'm still early in my career, but I guess we can consider them long-term goals in the sense of not like a year or two, but more, maybe 5 to 10 years. So I was able to do some kind of shadowing. It was more on a smaller level. That there was I was at one point interested in prosthetics. That was just kind of one of my options. And I got the opportunity to, I'm not going to call it shadow because it was kind of just a brief, maybe half-hour visit to his office. And I just really didn't like what I saw. Nothing wrong with the office or wrong with anything. I just kind of didn't feel comfortable and I didn't feel at home there. And I was like, okay, like I just don't think this is what I want to do. And that was super helpful because that was something that I was considering. And kind of on the flip side, I got the opportunity to, so my main passion is really surgical robotics. That's not exactly what I'm doing right now, but I got the opportunity, while I was a student at Penn, I had reached out to one of the surgeons there who utilizes a robotic surgery technique, or he utilizes it's called the Da Vinci robot. It's one of the big ones in that industry. So I was able to observe surgery being done by this robot. And I was just like so incredibly excited and happy to be there. And I was like, okay, like this is good. So I feel like those two experiences kind of really helped me develop my long-term goals. So one was during undergrad and one was during grad school, and they both kind of played a part in that. Regarding short-term goals and just in general, I think I'm just a very curious person. I like learning a lot and taking all types of classes, and that kind of factors into how my experience at Stern helped me kind of figure that out. Because with the physical sciences major, I had the opportunity, it's a very broad range of classes, with physics and math and chemistry, and I did the biology concentration, so I did anatomy and physiology. So that opportunity, and also the concept of all the electives that are required at Stern, I think it was super helpful for me because I like to have, a well-rounded education and just kind of all these different experiences that I was able to get at Stern, which I might not have been able to get if I just went to a different school and like majored in something very specific. So I kind of like that. And yeah, I think that's kind of what helped me form short-term goals because, I also with the help from people at the Career Center and various professors, kind of got me going in the sense like, okay, I'm interested in this medical devices engineering kind of field. So I'd say that's kind of what the bottom line is, really just that I'm a very curious person who likes to ask questions. And that's kind of what helped me develop, both short and long-term goals, really.
Awesome. Great to hear from you on that. I have a quick question now, shifting gears a little bit. And you had mentioned coursework. So what should our audience know, and those who are in pre-engineering or in similar fields that they want to get into? What should they know about the field of engineering generally or specifically that goes beyond what they might learn in their coursework?
Sure. So I would say I'll talk about more in science in general, like more like researchy type fields. The main thing is that there's not always an answer. A lot of times if you're in class and you're struggling with something, whether it's, you're writing code and you just can't quite figure out what's wrong, or really any type of science class or physics or math, like you're struggling with something. And generally you can go to a professor, you can Google it, you can ask a peer. There's usually a way around it. It might not seem easy and it might not be fun while you're in it, but like usually you can figure it out. But in the real world, there's not always an easy answer. Like you can be surrounded by really, really smart people who you think are geniuses and who really, really are smart. But sometimes you just kind of have to guess a lot, and it's a lot more guesswork and risk involved, and especially, in a startup like the one I'm working in, time is really money, and you can't just say, oh, let me spend a month trying to figure this out. And then suddenly you realize it doesn't work, and the limited funds are paying people salaries, and then you wasted a month. So, and even in a larger company, just in general, you can't really, it's a little harder to know that there's definitely an answer, unless you're in in the kind of field where, let's say you're kind of like an engineering technician or something, and everything's kind of figured out, and then you go and build things like with everything already preset, then maybe there are answers. But just in general, like it's a little bit harder to deal with. You just have to be more open to risk and trying things out. And kind of related to that, this actually came up at work today, so it's very relevant. Somebody was making some sort of comment about because we have an intern now who's currently a college student, and he's very like gung ho, and everything has to, he has to get things done really fast. So we were talking about the difference kind of in mindset between like a professional and a student. That students like you have an assignment, you have to finish it, and then you get a grade. But so that's kind of how this particular intern thinks, which is great because he's getting a lot done. But we're coming back and we're thinking like, there's no grade, and we don't know how long this is going to take, and yeah, it's just, so that's kind of a little bit interesting. But the main point of that is that like it has to work, and you can't just in school sometimes it's like, okay, I didn't do great on that assignment, or like the code didn't really work, so you get a B, maybe even a C, but like if you move on. But like at work, you can't just be like, oh, it doesn't really work so well, let's move on. You can't move on if like the basis of your entire product doesn't work. So that was kind of the insight of the day at work. So very relevant because it literally just happened, and a couple of us were talking about that.
Gotcha. Thank you for sharing that insight. Very timely that it happened
Yeah,
recently.
exactly.
Awesome. So you mentioned a little bit ago that you talked about shadowing experiences and field experiences. What would you say are the most valuable shadowing, internship, or work experiences that our audience can have, especially when they're trying to make their way while they're in college?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it is really just any type of work experience that you can put on your resume is great. Don't worry if it's not paid. I don't think I ever had the question, at any sort of interview. I don't think anyone's ever asked me if my work experience was paid or not. And a lot of the things that are currently on my resume were not paid, but it kind of doesn't matter. Obviously, like if you're, let's say, going to California for a summer and you need the money to pay for rent, like that's another story. But if you're like living at home and you don't need the paycheck, then don't worry about taking something that isn't like an official paid job. I think anything you do, even if it's part-time, really just any type of experience is good. So the shadowing that I did was not really very extensive. Like I said, it was kind of like half hour. I spoke to someone or I think there were 2 or 3 cases where I like, went in and met with people for an hour maybe or half an hour, but it wasn't, the shadowing itself wasn't very extensive, but I did a part-time internship while I was at Stern. It was very part-time, like a couple hours on Friday, and then one summer I spent a lot of time doing that. But it was just kind of a little more real world experience. You meet people, and I think that's also a really big aspect of any sort of experience you get, to attempt to maintain relationships with the people, because those are the people who wrote me recommendation letters for graduate school, and they were references for, for my job, for my current job. So I don't know that there's, I don't know if there's anything specific in terms of like what the best type of experience is, but anything you can put on your resume, even if it's not directly related to what you want to do in the future, any sort of experience in the general field, or even if it's different, honestly, just like filling up your resume with, obviously if you were like a waiter or something, that's a little less exciting, but if you did something that requires like some sort of technical skill and some sort of teamwork, that's always going to look good, kind of regardless of what exactly it is.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much. You have several projects listed on your LinkedIn that when I was researching your background, I took a look at. What should our audience know about the importance of such experiences, and how is it that they should go about trying to make those experiences for themselves?
Sure. Yeah. So projects in general, they're obviously, it's, for me, like each one is a learning experience and they each build on each other. And for a lot of them are experiences with teamwork. Teamwork is like the big word. At any interview, like you're most likely going to be asked, whether it's for grad school or for work, you're very likely going to be asked about your experience with teamwork and how you work on a team. And it's good to put those types of words on your resume. So I think, some of them, so some of the projects that I had done, there was one, I'll just mention a couple of them. One of them that I did was I worked with the team to kind of build a robotic piano player. So we had a keyboard, and then there was a combination of mechanical, electrical, and software type work to do, and we all kind of split it up between us. And ultimately we had, it was an actual keyboard, and then we built a system that was actually able to press down on the keys, and that was just a piece of a robotic band that the whole class put together. So something like that was a little bit more, extensive, and it was a larger project, but that was with a group. So I learned a lot from that, in the sense that I had to do things that, just skills that I hadn't necessarily had before, and also just communicating with people and saying, figuring out who's doing what and how you want to split everything up, and actually pulling your weight and getting it done. And then there was one of the other projects that I have listed. It's called the Waldo. I'm not really sure if that's an actual name or if that's what the professors decided to call it. But basically, it's kind of 2 identical systems that I had to design and build. And I would, if I moved one of the, so basically it was 2 like circle fixtures. And if I moved one of them, then the other fixture had a motor attached to it. And through a controller and some software, it had to move by that same amount. So I moved one, and then the other one would move itself. So something like that, that's something I did by myself. And that was actually my first project in the electromechanical mechatronics engineering space. And that was a very important learning experience, because it was firstly, it was my first one. I was doing it by myself. And I think one of the big things I learned from it is not so much the skill of, writing the software, designing things, but I kind of had to put it off to the side, because it was taking a very long time, because I was very new at this. And the next project in the class was a group project, and I couldn't delay, I couldn't say, oh, sorry, I'm busy with this, you do the project yourself. So I had to kind of put it aside, and it was a big struggle for me to be like, I didn't finish this, but I'm going to put it aside. And then I had to come back after everybody had already left for the semester, and I was like, okay, I'm going to finish this. So I feel like that was a good experience, just in the sense of it might not be easy to kind of put something aside, but you have to prioritize. And just the concept of coming back, if you might not have done a good job at the beginning, but you can always come back and fix it. Even though that's not necessarily as relevant in the real world as I had talked about before. But just in general, things like that. So I learned some certain skills in that project I built. And then, the next project, it was like, oh, I did that in the previous project. I kind of know what to do now. And that's kind of how all these projects are. So there are some people who are kind of hobbyists and do these things on their own time. But in general, these specific projects that I have on my LinkedIn are not things I did at Stern, because that was in a particular engineering program. So I'm not sure what I would say necessarily in that regard that you should be doing right now. But just, I think, to be aware of the concepts of whether or not it's like building things or whatever type of, or it's code, whatever type of engineering you're interested in. But a lot of it is really just like learning from every experience and building on it. That's it. And and that's a continuous thing, really, even to this day.
Excellent insight. Thank you. So, a little bit about skills. What are some of the technical skills and soft skills that our students should be looking into developing now? And maybe more importantly, where is it that they can look to find any of this information about that they need to have these particular technical and soft skills?
So I'll start with soft skills, because those are so important. And it's the kind of thing where, like, every day, I'm working on them, because you can never be too good at communicating, or and I'll start with that one, because that is the absolute key to everything, as cliche as that sounds. Being able to communicate with other people, and to not, and kind of just to be humble and not always think that your opinion's correct, even though it might be, but to listen to other people, and to be aware that, sometimes you might hear somebody else's idea and be like, oh no, it's not as good as my idea. But then you think about it and you're like, no, actually they're right. So I think that's not necessarily, that's kind of a separate thing aside from communication, but just, remaining humble and listening to other people, and being aware that you're not necessarily always going to be right. But yeah, just back to communication for a second. If there's a problem and you think that somebody can help you solve it, but they don't realize that there's a problem, then it's important to kind of get up and tell that person there's a problem, because they can, especially if you think they can help you fix it. So really just kind of going out of your comfort zone a little bit, like that's probably going to happen. But it is really just, kind of speak your mind, obviously in an appropriate way, but just to kind of always say what needs to be said, even if it's not necessarily comfortable. And to offer constructive criticism if you think it's going to be accepted. Yeah, but really just to kind of be aware that you should always be in communication, and don't ignore things if they're not seeming okay. Don't just walk away. And kind of, this is related sort of to what I was saying before, but just the awareness of being flexible, and being okay, not necessarily about like being right or wrong, but just being okay with kind of shifting your initial idea. If you come in saying like, this is how we're going to do things, and then you talk to people and you end up agreeing that this different method is better or whatever, just sometimes it's hard for people, including myself, to kind of like shift a mindset. But I think that can be really helpful. And I think that I kind of said this before also, but just teamwork is really important. And that, whether or not you're actually physically working on a team, or just, this is related even to flexibility, just listening to other people, and offering your advice and accepting other people's advice. And I feel like they all kind of end up meshing together a little bit. But those, I think, are really important soft skills, and just respecting other people, and being a nice person who people are comfortable approaching. Not necessarily in a personal sense, but if you're in school and you're the one that people know, like they don't have to be embarrassed to go to you if they need help or things like that. So those are all really helpful. In terms of technical skills, I think this might be sort of controversial, but I do think that everyone should know how to code as an engineer, like whether or not you're a software engineer. I think like understanding general concepts of coding is very, very helpful. And that doesn't mean you necessarily need to take, computer science classes if you're not interested in them, but just kind of trying to understand some basic concepts, I think, could be very, very helpful. And I'm trying to think what else in terms of, obviously whatever coursework you take, things like, Microsoft Excel can end up being very helpful in kind of a lot of different contexts, whether it's graphing or just data entry. Um, just kind of knowing the basics of that is helpful. Um, I don't know if I would call this a technical skill, but sometimes like you have to do a quick math problem, like even if it's like 2 + 5, like sometimes you just like dump it into Google. But things like that, like it is sometimes helpful to know kind of like basic multiplication or simple exponents or things like that. Like it is sometimes helpful to just be able to do that quickly. Um, just also another example, there was some guy that came to interview with my company, and he I like overheard my boss talking afterwards, and apparently he had made some comment about how he's really good at math. Um, but then I don't think my boss was like trying to quiz him, but I think like in context, um, my boss like said something about like, oh, like what's 2 to the 3rd power or something like that, and he had to like think for a while. And not to say if you can't do math in your head, you're not going to get a job, but my boss is just kind of like, he said that he's really really good at math, and then like he couldn't do this relatively simple. It took him a while to figure that out. So that kind of made me think like, oh, that's something that I feel like maybe, again, like you're not necessarily that you're going to get quizzed, but just kind of being able to do things like that relatively fast and not relying on the internet to solve things that you technically are capable of doing in your head. But yeah, other than that, I think the main thing that I would say in terms of like what you should try to learn if you're not already doing it would be understanding the general concepts of coding. But otherwise, I think in general more like whatever the coursework is, um, and yeah, that's the main thing. It's just kind of like learning and just kind of being open to learning. I don't think you necessarily need to do like any extra courses to teach you extra skills unless you're interested in a very specific field.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Changing the topics a little bit here, you mentioned before referrals that you were able to get because you did some work for professionals. So talking more about networking, how does one effectively network in your book as well as in the field in general? And what does it take to form some lasting connections in order for them to pay you in forward in the future?
Mhm. Yeah, so I actually really like talking about networking, because I just feel like it's such an important thing. And, whether it's going to career fairs and talking to people, or a lot of it goes back to what I had said before, just like being interested in asking a lot of questions and learning things. Um, and two, I think, I'm trying to think, the one internship that I had, which was the last internship kind of like before graduating. So it was really crucial that I get like an internship in my general field. And it was like kind of at the last minute, and I didn't have a set summer internship yet. So, I was talking to people at the career center there, and they had said, go on LinkedIn and look at people, this was at Penn. So it's like, look at the Penn alumni who are in companies who are somewhat interesting to you. So that's what I did. I kind of checked, who was doing anything in medical devices or surgical robotics, or I put in a whole bunch of different keywords. And a couple people came up, and I sent them either emails or LinkedIn messages, depending on what I had access to, and just basically saying, hey, can we chat? I did a similar program. I'm doing a similar graduate program to the one you did. You're working for a company that I'm really interested in. I'd love to hear about your experiences. And that's what I did, and I didn't get responses from everybody, and that's okay. That sometimes it doesn't necessarily feel good, especially if you really were excited to talk to a particular person. But like if you send out enough of them, someone will respond. And in my experience, like I've never been snubbed. Everybody's either been really really nice or hasn't responded. And people don't respond for a lot of reasons. They might forget, they might not see the message, or maybe they don't want to talk to you, but you'll never know that. Yeah, everybody's, in my experiences, has been really really nice. And in one particular case, I chatted with this person. She was really friendly, and she was telling me about her company, and she kind of mentioned something about, oh, maybe she could check with HR about summer internships, and I didn't bring it up because I don't necessarily recommend like contacting someone and be like, hey, I'm really interested in your company, can you get me an internship? Because like you need to attempt to form some sort of relationship first, I would say. But yeah, so we chatted for a bit, and then I didn't hear from her, so I sent her a text. I was like, oh, just checking in, and there was a whole bunch of back and forth, and ultimately she ended up connecting me with someone at her company, even though they didn't take interns, and ended up getting an internship there. And I think that's probably a very big part of what allowed me to get a job after graduate school. Having an internship that was was in a surgical robotics company. It was like in my general field of interest. Um, and so the reason I'm sharing like kind of the detailed version of that story is because I had to follow up with her. Like, she was really nice, but she was also really busy. So she's not like, her mind is not like, oh, let me make sure that HR is on top of this. So so at one point when I texted her, she's like, oh yeah, I never heard from them, let me go email them. So if I wouldn't have checked in, she likely wouldn't have remembered. So a lot of it is about following up without being annoying. And I think a lot of, because obviously nobody wants to be annoying, and that's sometimes a fear. So I think a good idea in that respect is to just maybe ask them, say, oh, when can I follow up? Because for some people, they might say follow up tomorrow, and some people might say follow up in a month. So you don't want to be annoying or, step on anybody's toes. So I think so, but following up is oftentimes crucial because, like I said, people get busy and they want to help you, but they don't necessarily remember. So yeah, reach out. The main thing is be okay with reaching out to complete strangers on LinkedIn message, by email if you have it, and give a brief explanation of like where you got their information from. Obviously, if it's on LinkedIn, like maybe you just randomly found them. But if you're sending them an email, then you should give some sort of context, like, oh, I know your cousin, or oh, I found you on LinkedIn. We did the same program, or we both went to YU, or whatever it might be. And that's kind of what I did in graduate school. And in undergrad, there were also a couple of Stern graduates that had gone on to do some sort of engineering, whether it was my particular interest or more general. So also with them, I emailed them, and I spoke to a couple of them. It was a little bit different of an experience because that was before I was in, I wasn't really looking for jobs at that point. I was looking to go to graduate school. So I was looking for different things at that point. But really just kind of talking to people, asking questions, and being okay with sending emails to strangers, that you have some connection with. Like I said, you both went to the same school, you went to the same summer camp, or whatever it might be. So yeah, just reach out to as many people as you can, and don't be scared of not getting responses, because it's very unlikely that people are going to be mean to you, which obviously isn't a good feeling and people try to avoid. But yeah, that's based on my experiences, that doesn't happen. And in terms of forming these relationships that last, sometimes it's really just about sending an occasional email, whether it's every 6 months or once a year. Like recently, there was a recruiter who was very helpful. He didn't end up connecting me with the job that I currently have. But he was just really helpful answering questions, and he got me a couple of interviews. So recently I just kind of sent him an email saying, oh, it's been a year since I started my job, and, I'm still so appreciative of how helpful you were to me. And I think he really appreciated it. And, I'm not necessarily looking to, stay friends with this person, but just to kind of maintain the relationship. And also just with some professors, I'll occasionally send them emails. Professors are busy, they have a lot of students. And even if you had a significant relationship with them, they don't necessarily have the time or memory to, email you and say, oh, how are you doing? So sometimes it's on you to email these people that you want to stay in touch with. You sometimes have to, again, like, just, it's a lot of it is just about going out of your comfort zone. Like, I don't necessarily want to email these professors and just update them on my life, because like, I don't know if they actually care, but sometimes I feel like I need to do that so that they can, so that in 5 years, they'll still know who I am, like whether I want to, whether I just want to, if I'm like visiting the school and I want to see them, or, if I need a reference letter, because it's really important to have people who you can go to and say, oh, can you write me a reference? And sometimes it's personal, sometimes it's professional, and sometimes it's for school, sometimes it's for work. But yeah, a lot of it is just about kind of staying in touch and sending emails every once in a while saying, hey, like I'm up to XYZ, I just got my first job, or I just moved to my second job and I live here or wherever. And yeah, a lot of it is, in my experience, that's how I try to maintain relationships, just checking in with people, saying, thinking of you, depending on their relationship. Like if you became friends with someone who was helpful to you, then maybe you can text them, but sometimes you'll send a formal email. Thank you again for how helpful you were in getting me this job, or things like that. So yeah, that's what I would say. It's kind of like, it's a lot of it is just about emailing. It's like send emails to random people. Don't worry if they don't respond. And occasionally it might be okay to kind of send a follow-up if there's someone that you're really excited to talk to. It's very possible they just missed your email. And again, if you send a second email and they still don't want to talk to you, they'll just ignore it. So yeah, a lot of it is just about sending random emails to strangers, asking friends and family if they know anyone who would be happy to talk to you. And in terms of keeping up, it's just, sometimes, send an occasional email, just updating on your life every 6 months, every month, every year, kind of depending on your relationship with the people.
That is a terrific encapsulation of the importance of networking. I really appreciate that you took the time to share all of that. Wonderful, wonderful take. Last question before we get into Q&A from the group. In general, or as specific as you'd like to take this, where do you see your field headed in the next 5 years? And how will you be adjusting to those developments?
So I think engineering in general is really moving fast. There's constant innovation, whether if you just think about like the cars that you're driving, it's like every year there are new safety features. And with robots, there are all types of new robots all the time. And with tissue engineering, and soft tissue healing, that's also a really big thing. There's so much going on, and it's just kind of constant innovation. So it's hard to say specifically like what I think is going to be in 5 years, but I definitely think there's going to be a lot more robots around. And not necessarily that they're going to take away people's jobs, but like even now, I think there are some hospitals that have robots that like make the beds or things like that. Like I don't think that's taking away anybody's job, because I think like that's just something else that nurses do. But it's more just like doing tasks that are just repetitive that people don't necessarily want to be doing. I think there are going to be a lot more robots doing that. And yeah, I think just in general, there's going to be a lot more automation. I'm not in the camp of believing that self-driving cars are going to be here yet. Extensively, maybe there'll be a little bit, but I think some people are like, oh, in 5 years, like everyone's going to have self-driving cars. So I don't believe that, because things take a long time. And you might be like, oh, we're almost done with this, then you don't finish till a year later. So yeah, I think in general, there's just gonna be a lot more automation and things are gonna be more available. Like just for example, machine learning was at one point like a very, very, very complex, software engineering technique, and it still is complex, but there are a lot of like softwares like MATLAB. They have these packages that you don't necessarily have to understand how to do machine learning. You can still apply the concepts by like pressing a button, so things like that there's going to be a lot more of that, I think, because that's already really, really moving fast. And basically, it just kind of puts things at people's fingertips a little bit easier. So I do think that's going to be the case. I don't know if I'm necessarily going to like actively do anything to I guess prepare myself or adjust for that, other than really just kind of staying informed and being aware of what's going on and doing what I can to participate in any sort of innovation, and also just kind of helping other people get involved. Just kind of talking to other people about kind of helping them jump in if they're interested in particular innovations, and kind of being involved as much as I can myself. But yeah, really, I think it's a lot about staying informed and just kind of being aware of where things are going.
Excellent, thank you. That rounds off all of my questions.
Okay.
So what we'll do is open up the floor to our audience. If you prefer to ask questions a little bit more indirectly, if you want me to ask the question on your behalf, please feel free to message me in the chat. Otherwise, if you want to ask Ariella a question directly, please feel free to do so.
I have a question. I was just wondering that I was going to ask what your field was going to look like, but thank you for asking that for me. But
Okay.
I was wondering, like, what projects are you working on specifically? Like, what does your job look like? Are you enjoying it? Was it what you expected it would be? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, sure. So the company that I'm working for now is it's a medical devices company, and they make a very tiny, like probably the size of a quarter. It's an ECG monitor. In general, it's supposed to do like physiological monitoring, but right now we're like in the process of getting FDA approval. So for now, it's like just approval in one specific thing. So it's just for heart monitoring. But it's really, really small and it sits on the body. So there's no surgical implantation. But, you know, the cardiologist can kind of see the data streaming online, obviously in a safe way. But so that's kind of what my company as a whole is doing. What I'm doing is the projects I'm working on are kind of to help boost the company and allow us to make more products faster. Because right now everything's pretty manual and it takes a very, very long time to make anything. So one of the things I'm working on is to program a robot to dispense glue, because the gluing process is very tedious and it has to go in a very specific location and you can't press too hard, you can't put too much glue or too little glue. So right now I'm helping to program a robot that can do that. And then another thing that I'm doing is, so we have these little, I'm trying to think how to describe it, kind of like Band-Aid products. They're not actually Band-Aids, but that's kind of what sticks on your skin and then the device goes on that. It kind of goes between the device and the skin. So that has several layers. So there's one thing that needs to be placed. It's something sticky, it's almost like a piece of double-sided tape basically. And that has to go down in one of the layers of this product. So right now I'm working on a machine, which is basically, it's kind of like a tape roll and it rolls around. And as it rolls around, we're pushing down these little, it's kind of like a circular piece of double-sided tape. So the machine is basically like pushing those down instead of somebody physically going down and putting one by one. So that's been, and it has to be in a very specific location. So that's kind of a software, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering problem. You know, because we're using motors and everything has to be in a particular place. And if something is too big or too small or breaks, you know, then everything kind of depends on everything. So it's a pretty multifaceted project. That's kind of the main thing that I'm working on now. But yeah, so in terms of, I was relatively happy, you know, when I first started, in the sense that obviously everything's like, you can never expect exactly what it's going to be like. But overall, like, I didn't feel like, you know, even though I feel like I'm learning, I kind of felt like I wasn't totally thrown into some strange world. It was like, oh, you know, I learned these concepts in school, I'm applying them in a different way. But it did feel like it felt familiar. It wasn't like I kind of started and it was like, what in the world is this? I've never heard of this before. So, you know, I'm constantly learning new things and everything's like deeper than I thought it was. But overall, I would say it wasn't too much of a culture shock going, you know, jumping in. But then again, I think mindset, it's a lot of it is about mindset, because kind of like what I was talking about before is like, students are generally focused on like getting things done and getting graded. But in the real world, depending on what kind of supervisor, like my supervisor is like not very hands-on with me. So I kind of had to shift gears and like get used to the fact that like, I'm not going to be in touch with him all the time about exactly what I did. Like, did I do a good job? Did I not do a good job? It's a lot of it is like, if there's a problem, he'll let me know, but otherwise I just have to keep going. And that's not really like a student way of thinking so much. So a lot of it is about like shifting mindset. So that definitely took a while and I'm still working on that a year later. But overall, I would say it's like, you know, it wasn't like a world of a difference from what I was expecting.
Terrific. Thank you for asking the question. We did get a question in the chat. Essentially, they wanted to know a little bit more about how you transitioned from attending Stern to getting into engineering. I know from looking into your background and what you've been sharing, you transitioned into graduate school. So if you haven't already touched upon some details yet, and they're kind of in the back of your mind, can you give us a little bit more detail about that transition, your mind state, and how it is that factored into you making those decisions early in your career?
Yeah, sure. So I know Stern had the like the pre-engineering program with like the joint program with Columbia and I think also Stony Brook. So I was considering that, but at the time I didn't feel like there was, you know, there were advisors and people kind of knew what was going on, but it wasn't like a common enough program that there were a ton of people out there who had done it. And I just kind of didn't feel comfortable with that. Just, you know, kind of jumping into this program that I didn't know anyone who had participated in it. And one of the main reasons that I didn't do it also is because that kind of gets you a second bachelor's, and I could have gotten a master's in the same amount of time. So I'm not necessarily saying that that was a good idea, because it was definitely very difficult, like getting up to speed, because I was coming as a non-engineer, joining an engineering master's program with other people who already had bachelor's degrees in engineering. So I definitely, depending on on the person, like I might actually recommend doing something more like the joint program if that's, I'm not even sure if that still exists. But if it does, I do think it's beneficial in that because you're going into another undergrad program, you're not expected to be like it's meant for people who have the background that you have. So that's a positive of that. So I decided to do a master's program, like I said, because it kind of ended up being the same amount of time. So what I did was I was lucky enough to find again, like somebody who was just really nice and was willing to talk to me. And that's kind of how I ended up with this part-time internship that I had during Stern. And some of the people there were the ones who wrote me reference letters for graduate school. So it was important to me to have something on my resume that was like engineering related a little bit. At that internship, I had worked with some engineers, and it was kind of like a medical devices lab. So it's relevant to what I was interested in. So a lot of it is like, so I applied to several schools, worked on a personal statement, and it's hard to know kind of what is important. I didn't do fabulously on my GREs, and I still got into graduate school. So I don't think that necessarily makes a huge difference, but I guess maybe it depends on the program or the school. But yeah, it's like, trying to gain opportunities during undergrad that can allow you to have good references, because I do think the reference letters probably matter, because it's somebody who worked with you in a professional or academic setting that's hopefully saying that you do good work and that you'll be an asset to the school or whatever it might be. But yeah, so I'm trying to think what else specifically was part of the process. So getting, having the internship, having some level of experience that was relevant. I did a lot of research into different types of schools and, what types of programs there would be and what exact program I was interested in. And a lot of it is also, it's important to also like research the school and show that you research a school in the personal statement. A lot of times it's recommended to, kind of name drop a particular professor that you looked into at that school, who you're interested in their work, and you'd love to, just kind of mention something specific about the school that you're interested in. And yeah, I think that was kind of the main thing. So it took a while to figure out exactly what I wanted, but then I, got myself some references, did a lot of research into the various schools and the options, and I applied to a bunch of schools. I think I ended up applying to 7, which I think compared to like medical school, that's not a lot. But yes, I applied to a bunch of schools and then had to choose kind of what ended up working the best for me. But that was the process. And then once I started, it was, depending on what type of engineering you want to do, and how prepared the courses at Stern can make you. As far as I understand, the computer science program has kind of like grown a lot since 2016. So that I think you can get more direct experience already at Stern. But something like mechanical engineering or electrical engineering, you're probably gonna, if you do jump right into a master's program, it's probably not going to be like super easy to just kind of jump right in and fit right in, because you're working with people who have a lot more experience than you do usually. So a lot of it is really just about I was really, really lucky to find people that were just nice and were willing to help. And professors that were willing to help, but just kind of to be aware that it's not necessarily going to be easy. And you might have to kind of put in your own time to, teach yourself certain things or take a little more time to do the homework than somebody else might take. But yeah, that was kind of my overall process. And generally I'm happy that I went to Stern. I'm happy that I had this experience overall. Like, sometimes I think like, oh, like, should I have gone somewhere else that would give me a bachelor's in engineering? But then I was kind of like, I really like my Stern experience. So I'm not like, that's why when people say like, oh, like, should I go to Stern? Because people have asked me like, should I go to Stern if I'm interested in engineering? And like, sometimes I'm not sure what to say, because I'm like, I really like Stern. So I don't want to tell anybody not to go. But like, if you know right now that you want to be a mechanical engineer, like as a senior in high school, then that would be a harder decision, because like the Stern experience is great, but like you would probably have to spend a little more time in school to ultimately get to that goal. But I think like in my experience, like I didn't know right away what I wanted to do. So it worked out really, really well for me, because I was like, I got to have that experience, and I got kind of like what I had talked about before. I had that like more well-rounded, undergrad experience, which was really great for me. But it did take, I guess, like 5-6 years to get to that place. So, obviously you guys are all already at YU, so it's a little different. But yeah, like I definitely, just overall, it's about, good references, having something on your resume, whatever it might be. It doesn't need to be exactly something in your field of interest, and just kind of being willing to put in a little extra effort.
Terrific. Thank you. We have time for maybe one more question. If anybody wants to ask a question. Could also be in the chat if you want to ask. Yes.
Is there, I don't know if this is like too specific of a question,
Mhm.
but is there like a place, what do you know of a place that we can get an engineering internship for the summer if we haven't taken so many classes yet that would like help fill that? Because I feel like when I was like looking into it, it's like easier to get a computer science internship, but I'm really not so interested in that. I'm more interested in the engineering. So is there like a way to do that?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. I was kind of thinking about this before, so I'm glad you asked that. So a lot of engineering companies are not necessarily going to take someone who's not in an engineering um, program, which is probably the kind of situation you're in. So what I ended up doing is kind of just what I had talked about before regarding networking, is just kind of emailing a whole bunch of what I did is I emailed a lot of people at NYU, since that was near CERN, just people that in heads of labs, um, and that might not be traditional, and you might not want to work in a lab like as a career, but there are a lot of labs in if you're interested in anything in the bio field, like hospitals will, large hospitals like NYU or Mount Sinai, like will likely have labs that are doing things that are engineering related. So a lot of it is really just kind of sending out a whole lot of emails to a whole bunch of people that you Google that work at these places. In terms of actual companies, that's definitely harder. But you might be able to kind of get a slightly different job that's not an engineering job at a company that does something that you're interested in. That's kind of like a different, just like having that name on your resume and being surrounded by people that are doing things that you're interested in doing could be helpful as well. But it is definitely a challenge. Like unless you know someone, I would say it's probably pretty difficult to get like a mechanical engineering internship, for example, as a non-mechanical engineering student. But yeah, I think working in a lab is a good opportunity for that, even if that's not like your favorite thing and that's not what you want to do moving forward. But yeah, it's a lot about just like sending out a whole bunch of emails and hoping that people respond, which is, I know it's not a great answer, but that's kind of what you have to do sometimes. And the more emails you send, the more likely you'll get a response.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Just to quickly wrap up, unless somebody has another question, they can ask. Doesn't seem like there's any more questions. Okay, great. So Ariella and I were talking before we had started the program, and she really wanted to make mention that not only does she really favor networking and putting yourself out there to meet people, she really is interested in hearing from you all if you would like to connect. And this does present a great opportunity to say, I met you at a MAPS program. I attended the MAPS program and learned a little bit about you. Would love to take some time to learn a little bit more. I'm sure if you're flexible with her, no doubt busy schedule, that she'll make time for you. So if you go back to the MAPS flyer, on that flyer is her LinkedIn, but you can also look her up on LinkedIn just in case. And she had mentioned that she's very open to connecting with you all. So if that's something you do, by all means, go right ahead. If you ever need some support on how it is that you can reach out to not just Ariella, but to any professionals, you can always come to the Career Center, make an appointment, and we can connect with you so that we can support those pursuits of yours. Ariella, big thank you for joining us tonight. Great insight that you shared. Thank you
That's my pleasure.
Thank you for attending as well, students who have joined us. And if you want to follow up on anything that you learned, please feel free to connect with the Career Center. Otherwise, thank you and have a great evening, everybody.
Have a
Okay,
great
thank
evening.
you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.